Hello there, and welcome to The High Ground, a doof bonus content show where we're taking the carriage into BBC's Pride and Prejudice. I'm your host with an extraordinary talent for flattering with delicacy, Reuben Morehouse.
I'm your single host in possession of a good fortune who must be in want of a wife, Elliot Diebold.
And I'm your silliest host in all of England, Georgia Diebold.
Yeah, Pride and Prejudice, huh? We're 2 episodes into the 6-episode miniseries, and yeah, I wasn't really sure what to expect with this one, but I had a real blast so far.
Yeah.
I'm so glad that you're both enjoying it.
It's very fun. I was kind of like, obviously it's in the same way that Shakespeare has, right? Like, it's lingered in the cultural zeitgeist, and there obviously must be a reason for that. And so I was kind of excited to find out what that reason was. And I don't have any real major breakthroughs on that other than just it is very fun.
Yeah. I definitely think there's a kind of timeless quality to these Regency dramas. Like, I'm a big fan of Regency dramas in general. And for me, I think that comes from this was like maybe the time when society was the most like just had a fuckload of rules and people had roles they were meant to fulfill, like the amount of social pressure on you to perform a certain way. I can't think of another time where there was like more of that for most people. And so it's kind of really easy to create a lot of drama
from nothing.
Yeah. And like, that sounds like it's cheapening what Pride and Prejudice is doing. I think it's doing it very well, but like, it's just, like in terms of bang for your buck, in ability to create shit and start drama, like you just can't beat these Regency dramas. It's so fun.
Yeah, I wonder if there's I guess, element to it of something that I've noted in a lot of these stories is the society obviously very heavily kind of enforces these specific gender roles and stuff, but the protagonists are characters who work to defy those, at least in some way, and that's always implicitly entertaining, I guess, and like speaks to this common human experience of trying to break out of the box that you've been put into. And maybe that's part of why it's so fun, is these are great rules that it's very fun to see Lizzie Bennet kind of pushing against, I guess. Yeah,
because you always want to root for the person who is fighting against shitty societal norms that won't let them be who they want to be. Yeah, in the same way that like fantasy or sci-fi like exaggerate stuff in order to tell stories, you could kind of argue Regency drama is just exaggerating like societal pressure on people.
Yeah.
I think the other thing, like Jane Austen has that real talent similar to Shakespeare for creating characters who just have these timeless qualities. Like you see bits, like things in the characters, traits in the characters that you see in people in your actual life, even these days. And the humor translates surprisingly well. Like, it's so, every time I watch it, I'm like, it's so much funnier than I remember.
It's very funny. Yes.
And
like,
a lot
it's
of that
laugh
is just
out
from,
loud hilarious.
Yeah, and it's just like the awkwardness of the, like, and stuff about the people. That's the funny part, which is like things that, you do, like, Elliot and I will talk about the fact that Mrs. Bennet shares a lot of qualities with our own mum, which makes her even more hilarious. And like Mr. Collins is just so like weirdly gross and awkward, and it's just so funny.
Jane Austen's also, so she's just very witty. Like the slam dunks people are throwing at each other through like the pretense of like high society language. Like it's great burns. Like she's also just fucking clever and got a sharp tongue.
Yeah,
some brutal takedowns for sure.
Yeah,
but I mean, like, even I don't know, like Mr. Collins or Miss Bennet, like who are maybe the most cartoonish of the characters that we've seen so far, I guess. Maybe that's not quite the right word, but, the most extreme of the characters. They're so clearly human and relatable in very clear ways that makes them so captivating, I suppose.
And I think there's no evil people. Like even the people who end up being bad have good qualities or, have their moment where they're redeemable or where you understand where they're coming from in some way. Which again, there's all shades of grey and a lot of like variety among the characters. Like there's a lot of people who are very, very different from each other, and very similar from each other, and watching how they play off of each other within these like weird rules of society is just so fascinating for some reason.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think something else that I want to touch on, which kind of defied my expectations going into this, really one of the only things that I know about this story or knew about it before I started watching it was that it's a love story between the main character and Mr. Darcy, right? Like Colin Firth as Mr. Darcy was in my head a romantic lead. But holy shit, is he so unlikable in these first episodes. It actually makes me so excited for the what I assume must be blossoming romance between Eliza Bennet and Mr. Darcy, because it seems so incomprehensible, and that's what's so delightful about it.
Oh yeah, we've got like a hell of a redemption arc coming right now, don't we? Because
exactly.
I was thinking the same thing. I was like, isn't this guy the love interest like 15 minutes in? Because he was just being like an unapologetic fuckhead. And
he's so unattractive. Like at the start, you think, I hate this guy.
Yeah.
I think it's got, I mean, obviously it's a rom-com and there's so many rom-coms. There's that kind of unique romance. Like, I mean, it's more prominent in media now probably because of Pride and Prejudice is the kind of, they hate each other and then they love each other is now like a bit of a trope. But I think it was pretty original when Jane Austen did it. And it's obviously really funny, but like it does have that bit of depth. Like I think and I mean, we'll see this as we go obviously across all 6 episodes, but the title Pride and Prejudice like really fits with, I think the main thing isn't just that it's a romance or a comedy. Like it's really looking at how people are really judgmental of each other and how that affects the ways that people end up interacting, how they end up, making their way through society, and how all these different characters, like you look at Lizzie and Mr. Darcy, and they're actually so similar, but they're just really judgmental in different ways. And how they butt heads because they're basically the same person, but they're so sure that they're right. It's just like, and just everybody, like, Mrs. Bennet's really judgmental of everybody. The Bingleys are really judgmental. Like they're all just so prejudiced.
Most of the Bingleys.
Except for the living angel, Mr. Bingley.
He's
the only pure
being.
character.
I'm so glad. I was going to come in here and really put my foot down that this was a pro Mr. Bingley podcast.
Of course it is. Mr. Bingley is maybe
flawless.
the only nice character in this except for, I guess, Jane. They're both just so perfect.
That's why they're so perfect. They're both
the only
just
good
so
characters.
Flawless.
Yes.
Yeah, Mr. Bingley doesn't have a hateful bone in his body. Like, right from his toe bones to his empty skull, it's all good bones.
I love when, Jane and Lizzie will be talking about, they'll be gossiping. And it's just like the contrast. Jane, like, there's one bit, I think we haven't seen it yet, but she gets really stuck because she can't believe, it's like she has to believe that somebody's the baddie in the story. And she's like, shutting down because she's like, I just can't, like, they can't. Oh, I just can't. And Lizzie's like just laughing at her, like you just can't believe that somebody could be bad. But then Lizzie's the opposite. She's one bad thing about somebody and she's like scum of the earth. And it's just so funny seeing the difference between them.
Yeah. I also the Regency aesthetic is so fun. I feel like I said this when we were doing like the Mummy movies, and I was like, I know there's like kind of this inherently problematic dynamic with like the whole Tomb Raider, Indiana Jones Prejudice, but I just love the aesthetic so much, and I kind of feel the same about Regency stuff. I'm like, this period of time obviously sucked for like pretty much everyone, but it's so nice to look at, and I just enjoy the aesthetic of it. So like, I'm like, I don't care if it's problematic. I want more stories like this.
Yeah, all the costumes and the sets and just the casting are so good in this. And you just notice like you can just really immerse in the story because it's all just it just fits so nicely and it all just looks so good that you don't get taken out. You know, sometimes you're watching something and there's this like cardboard looking like what was it? One of the Scorpion King movies had literally toys in it. Like people were holding toy swords. It's kind of hard to like become immersed, but this is all it looks like what you imagine it really, really looked like in those days. It just makes it so much easier to get into it.
Well, they go into the town in episode 2 where we meet Mr. Wickham. And that town was so, like, that was just a whole fucking medieval-looking town. It was crazy.
Yeah. Well, I mean, medieval is a little bit
not
further
quite
back.
Medieval.
Same diff, though, from the outside. Like, the buildings, you know, were just bricks in mud shit, you know?
Yeah, like the sets are really good.
Yeah.
So I guess I should, at this point, raise the concept that I was watching all this with Penny, and Penny's a big fan of you know, Pride and Prejudice and of this specific adaptation. So I'll chime in with some of her thoughts that I found entertaining throughout as well.
Okay.
But just on the topic of the costumes, Penny did raise that she thought this was the worst era for women's fashion. All the waists were so high up at the boob. A lot of the outfits look kind of ridiculous.
I don't mind it.
It's weird. I will say, surprisingly booby, a lot of the dresses.
Yes.
Like when they're at the balls, especially, you're like, gee, they're showing a lot of like cleavage. But I totally agree. Like that shape just doesn't do a whole lot for the curves. But
did you feel like I felt like maybe 80% of Lydia Bennet's outfits looked like pajamas?
Yeah.
And I don't know if that's just a commentary on how childish she is, but a lot of the characters look like they're wearing pajamas when they're out in public, and it was kind of funny to me.
There was one scene where we were, I think it was the Bingley sisters and everybody, and then Lizzie, when Lizzie was visiting while Jane was sick, and Hannah's just going like, you know, Caroline Bingley is wearing like this really intricate dress and like shitloads of jewelry, and she's wearing a hat, and she's just like in her living room.
Yeah.
And Hannah was like, you know, this is my nightmare. And it's so true. But then Lizzie looked quite comfortable. Like she was wearing just this sort of very simple pink dress that actually looked pretty comfy. And you're like, yeah, it was. But overall, I agree. Not a super good. I don't know. It's kind of quaint. But yes,
definitely.
Not very flattering.
Can I bring our attention to an even more upsetting issue from this time period in my book? Why are there no paths? Like, everybody keeps walking to each other's houses and they're just walking through the middle of fields. Like,
I think they're in the country, Elliot. Like, they're not going to make paths between everyone's houses.
Yes, they are.
Well,
they get horses and carriages to the houses.
But you can then take a shortcut through the fields to get there faster on foot.
And I think that this is because we're seeing the world through Lizzie Bennet's eyes. She is very... I mean, there's that specific scene where she's walking over to visit Jane at Netherfield Hall or whatever, and she clearly is one who is not one to care too much about her appearance.
I think she's specifically avoiding
But
paths.
Jane, I'm also thinking, like, the time when I took this in my notes is when Jane is on her horseback ride to that house to start with. She just turns off of their driveway, like, halfway through it, and just, like, starts going up a field, like, fucking going as the crow would fly to this place. And it's just like, there's a road right there. Like, you know.
I assume it's faster.
They're free spirits.
I don't know.
There wouldn't be that many roads. Like, infrastructure in those days can't have been great.
It's good enough to get carriages there. I don't know.
But I assume it would take longer. But the carriage is faster. Whereas if you're walking or you're on horseback and you're not
horseback
cantering,
is as fast as a carriage.
No, but not when you're a girl, because you're not allowed to trot or canter. You've got to walk on side saddle.
Still just no. It's too much effort. You stick to the roads.
And I think you can't afford a carriage unless you have a wealthy patron like my favourite patron, Mrs. What's her name? Caroline de Burgh.
Oh, Lady Catherine de Burgh.
Burgh, yeah. What a champion.
I hear good things about her.
I hope we get to meet her. I'm so excited.
I can't wait to meet her.
Should we talk about we've kind of given our general impressions, but yeah, let's get into like the specific plot, and that'll give us some more things to talk about.
Sure. So
yeah, the story is following the Bennet family. The the youths of which are 5 unengaged girls whose mother is very eager to find any of them a husband. And this story opens with us hearing about a new eligible bachelor who has arrived in town.
2 new eligible bachelors, we're soon to find out.
Well, we find out, yes. We find out there's a friend that's there that's even more rich and eligible.
Well,
less eligible.
Yeah, I guess the eligibility is arguable.
Depends on who you're asking, if you're asking Lizzie or if you're asking Mrs. Bennet.
Yeah.
So, unlike a lot of the, frankly, garbage that we've been watching pretty recently in this podcast, I feel like...
I don't know what you're referring to.
I really noticed the difference with this was very show, don't tell, like the way that they introduced the characters. I don't know if I was almost paying more attention to it because I know the characters, that I was thinking, how do I introduce all these people? But it was very show, don't tell, like with dialogue and, then obviously some people we get are formally introduced to each other like, oh, may I introduce my friend so-and-so. But Elliot kind of mentioned he'd like a rundown of the characters because there are quite a lot of them and there's a lot of surnames and first names flying around.
I just thought it'd be good for, Reuben and I, if we're stopping at this point, I think it'd be worth going through everyone and making sure we're on the same page about what we know about them.
And what we think about them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So obviously we have the Bennet family is the main family.
And there's 5 sisters.
Yes.
There's Jane. I'm going to go from
eldest
descending order, eldest to youngest. So Jane is the hot one.
And the
Penny told me, actually, as a fun fact, that Jane Austen always names not just her prettiest characters, but like her nicest pure characters Jane, which I just think is a fun move.
It's funny too because she was very much, I think, not that way.
Yeah.
She was very much more like Lizzie. Like she never ended up marrying. She was very headstrong, I think. Like
that sounds like a fun joke then at her own expense, maybe. Like sounds like the kind of joke Lizzie would make,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Speaking of, the second eldest is the main character, Lizzie. I don't feel like we need to go into that one. She's sort of covered by the whole fucking story.
I guess the main thing with her, like, she's the smart one. Like, she's smart.
She's the son, is really the vibe I get. Like, in this old world, we go, like, she's the closest thing Mr. Bennet has to a son.
He doesn't even pretend that she's not his favorite. He's very obvious about it. And that Jane and Lizzie, generally speaking, are his favorites. He does not shy away from that.
Yeah. So then the next one's Mary, right? And she's the nerd.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yes, she's very introverted, the nerd. She's the real underdog of the Bennet family.
She doesn't,
in my opinion.
She just wants to play her piano, like.
But she also wants to give weird, like, sanctimonious advice all the time. That's so funny. Like, she's so just speaking from the book with zero social ability, but will tell everybody how they should act. And it's like, I don't know. Anyway, we can talk about it more later.
God. So then, is the next one? I don't. It's Lydia and someone else.
So the next one is Kitty.
Sure.
Kitty is the one who Lydia's always picking on and domineering over.
They're just like a pair in my head. They're like the two.
Yes.
Like they're just the babies. Yeah.
Yeah, and then Lydia's the little one who's very loud and sort of no decorum.
Yeah.
Really no decorum.
Yeah. Just great. And then we have the parents. So Mr. Bennet is like, I think, a very smart but now very sort of bitter man because he had to marry this really fucking annoying lady. And I think he does stress about his daughters too.
Let's open the can of worms that is Mrs. Bennet, shall we? Because Mrs. Bennet is a driving force of conflict in this story, right? But as the next episode kind of makes clear, they're not in a good situation as a family. 5 daughters, none of which are engaged, mean that as soon as Mr. Bennet dies, they're effectively homeless. And Mr. Bennet really, as Penny kind of pointed out to me, like, has failed this family by not engineering a situation where one of the kids will get married, right? Like, really, practically, Mr. Collins should have been engaged to one of these sisters about 15 years ago, or betrothed or whatever, right? Like,
I think that's what's, like, fun about Mrs. Bennet is, like, yeah, she's kind of got a point, you know? Like, she's
kind of right.
She's so annoying and, like, going about it in kind of the worst possible way. But she's also kind of one of the few people taking this problem seriously. Because, like, these five are not cut out for, like, a hard knock life. And that's what's staring them in the face unless they quickly sort this out. So, like, I completely agree. I think what's fun about her is that, like, the worst part about her whole thing is she's kind of got a point.
Yeah, but it's fun as well because she's so self-sabotaging. It's kind of crazy, but we'll get to that soon enough, I'm sure.
I do feel like Mr. Bennet is right to go, like, so Mr. Bennet is constantly torturing her, like, just like saying shit to stir her.
Yeah, he's just shit stirring her constantly, and it's funny, but it's also really mean.
No, but like, what? Like, I'm sorry, if you've had to live with her for like 20 years, where else are you going to find joy in your life?
Well, that's kind of the point, right? Is that he makes a comment later in the movies about, she makes some comment about her nerves, and he's like, yeah, they've been my companion these 20 years or something. Like, you know, he's the only way he can not hate her is to just wind her up and have some fun with it. Which is kind of horrible,
it's sad,
but I mean, you kind of can understand too, because she's really annoying. Like, oh man,
she is very annoying.
And as you can imagine,
her voice
keeps going.
is so
like,
great.
It just keeps going.
And that's the thing, because she has no off switch, so the only thing you get to play with is the on switch.
Yeah, and she's she's just that real mix of like opinionated and really dumb. Like, that's just so, like, she's so happy to voice her opinion, but she's just not very smart lady. It's just so annoying.
I really like the little detail. Mr. and Mrs. Bennet, like, call each other that. Like, I don't think we know what either of their names are. Like, to each other, they're Mr. Bennet and Mrs. Bennet.
Which is that's not a reflection on them. That's how things were at the time. Like, you'll notice she calls Lizzie like Miss Lizzie and stuff. Like, that's what things were sort of partly like back then. But yeah, there's no love there.
Yeah, like, I think the fact that they're definitely the main two doing it right at the start, and I really was like, oh, okay, this is just like a formal thing. Yeah.
And I mean, I think it's also helps lead us into, like, why are the Bennet sisters so determined to marry for love? Because they grew up with these two, and like, you can see it's like Lizzie's like, I don't fucking, like, that's why she turns down Mr. Collins, spoilers. She does not want to be her dad. Like, and that's why her dad is like, yeah, you know what? Don't marry him.
Yeah.
Like, he doesn't want, so even though you can really see where Mrs. Bennet is coming from, like, they're going to be homeless. You can also see where the others are coming from. Like, she doesn't want to be miserable her whole life either. And so, yeah, it's kind of interesting. Just two different priorities, I guess.
See, again, like, this Regency shit, it's so easy to just create situations like that. I love it.
So anyway, that's the Bennet family. Just for, like, I guess another, like, around their family. So Mr. Collins is Mr. Bennet's cousin. And Mr. Bennet had a very sour relationship with Mr. Collins' dad. That's why there was no reconciliation before this. So as much as we all shit on Mr. Collins, like, he actually reached out the olive branch when his dad died.
Again, Mr. Collins is very awkward, but I actually think seems like, you know, a pretty decent person.
Yeah, he's not a bad guy. He's just massively awkward.
He's just really awkward. Just annoying.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's why, and obviously the conflict comes from the fact that then Mr. Collins will be inheriting their house. Then Mrs. Bennet has two siblings. She has a brother and a sister. We have actually met her sister is Mrs. Phillips, who is married to the attorney, and they live in town in Meryton. So they had a party at their house. That was the one where Mr. Collins said, "Oh, your apartment reminds me of a small room in Rosings," and she's like, "What the fuck?" That's Mrs. Bennett's sister.
Good, such a good moment,
such a good interaction. And they're like, "He's trying to pay you a compliment," and she's like, "Oh, I see." So that's Mrs. Bennett's sister. And then she has a brother who hasn't come into it yet. His name is Mr. Gardner, and he has a wife. And they come into it later, the Gardners. So that's kind of their family. And then we have the Bingleys. So Mr. Bingley is the son and has obviously inherited everything. And then he has
my boy. My boy, Mr.
boy.
Bingley.
The champion.
Oh, boy. Yeah. And then he's got two sisters. So Caroline Bingley is, I think, the younger sister. And she's the one, like the tall one with the dark hair who's like a huge bitch, basically.
Is that the one who's incredibly horny for Mr. Darcy?
Mr.
Yes,
Darcy.
Yeah. And then his other sister is Mrs. Hurst, who's married to Mr. Hurst. Mr. Hurst is the guy who's always drunk.
Right. Mr. Hurst was one of my favorite characters in this
because
he's such a nothing.
He's checked out.
He's so checked out online.
He's just a great side character. I like the bit where when they're like, oh, like all the Bennets come over when Jane is sick. And they're like, oh, we're to be invaded by every Bennet in the country. And he tries to leave the room. And then right as he goes to leave, they'll come in and he goes, oh, Lord. Just sort of goes to the corner. It's like, he's
just kind of passed out asleep in half the scenes.
Yeah. He's just constantly drunk.
He's such a loser. Yikes.
Yeah. So he's obviously must have come from some rich background. So he's married to Charles' other sister. So that's why. So those two are
and that's
sisters.
why the Bingleys are here.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And that's why those two women who always hang out. It's because they're sisters. And then obviously Bingley is BFFs with Mr. Darcy. So he's worth double Bingley. OMG. And so he has a little sister called Georgiana, who we haven't met yet, but I think
she plays the piano
briefly.
good.
Yeah, she's real good at piano. And Mr. Wickham thinks that she's obnoxious or something. And then, so Wickham's dad was the steward for the OG Mr. Darcy, like our Mr. Darcy's dad. His name is Fitzwilliam Darcy.
Wait, sorry, his first name is Fitzwilliam?
I think so.
No wonder he goes by Darcy.
Or is that his cousin? Shit. He has a cousin.
Oh, who cares?
Anyway. He has a cousin who I forgot about until just now, who comes in when they go to Rosings. Anyway, and Wickham is like, he grew up with Wickham, but they're not related. And then Lady Catherine de Bourgh is Mr. Darcy's aunt or something. And I think Wickham mentioned that her plan is for her daughter to marry Mr. Darcy.
Yeah, her daughter, who is kind of sickly and
very young,
housebound.
Yeah.
Which was quite an interesting twist, and really, again, was hilarious when put in the context of the fact that Bingley's sister has such a clear crush on Mr. Darcy.
When Wickham says that, and
zero chance.
Lizzie's response is just, "Oh, poor Miss Bingley." Like, lol.
Yeah, very good.
And then we have in town, we also have the regiment of soldiers.
Oh yes, the military men.
Yeah,
Lydia and Kitty's friends.
Yes. So Colonel Forster is their commanding officer or whatever, and he's got his wife with him, who's that sort of small lady with the short hair, who's always hanging around the offices. And then there's like Denny is the only one who we really hear named. There was some other guy as well. And then, of course, Wickham has just joined the regiment.
And sorry, clearly Wickham's story is going to turn out to be bullshit, right? Like that's...
Or have more details to it.
Sure.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Anyway, and then we have the Lucases is the only other people I could think of. So like Lizzie's BFF, who's always, she just sits in the corner of the room and just like has everybody figured out, is Charlotte. And she's her kind of background. So she's older. She's like 25. So she's like an old lady.
Oh, God.
Yeah, she's an old maid.
An old maid.
Yeah.
So
that's kind of her background. And then she's got a younger sister who's like this little girl with curly blonde hair who we do kind of see at a lot of the balls hanging out with her dad, who is Mr. Lucas, or Sir Lucas, sorry, which is like the very jovial man who hosted the first party.
And is he the one who keeps making some pretty awkward faux pas?
Yeah, like he's just like very friendly, but he keeps being like, "Oh, Mr. Darcy, why don't you dance with Lizzie? She's so pretty." Like that guy.
He's the one who mentioned quite out of turn that he's very much looking forward to Mr. Bingley and Jane's wedding.
Yeah. So that's surprisingly is Charlotte's dad, because Charlotte seems way more on the ticket.
Yeah, she seems like she's got her head screwed on.
Yeah.
Pretty right.
And like their background is kind of, like he was a merchant and then like got a knighthood. So that's why the Bingleys kind of look down on him, is because he's sort of...
He's new money.
Yeah, well, not even money, like sort of new to to society or whatever.
Yes, he doesn't quite know how it all works, does he?
Yeah, exactly. And so that's kind of everybody so far. And I think pretty much everybody who's going to come in has been explained there in some way. Like all the major characters.
Well, we don't need to talk about people who haven't come in yet anyway.
Yeah. But I mean, just like the Gardeners and Lady Catherine de Bourgh, like not too many other people pop in besides those, who are important anyways that I could think of.
But yeah, so I guess we pretty rapidly hear more about Mr. Bingley, the new bachelor in town. He shows up to the kind of local village dance, bringing his even richer friend, Mr. Darcy. Mr. Bingley almost immediately is kind of taken with Jane Bennet, but Mr. Darcy is not endearing himself to anybody in town by how much of a snob he is.
Yeah, again, it's so funny seeing the difference. Like the whole town hates him, and to some degree, the Bingley sisters, because they're all such snobs.
Yes.
And they think, like they don't like these people. And then on the flip side, they think everybody here sucks. Like they all just hate each other and they just never even gotten to know each other or tried.
It's so good though. Like I fucking loved how bitchy everyone was here. It made me it took me back to high school. I think that's the eternal appeal of these story, Reuben.
Totally.
It takes you back to how bitchy everyone was in high school. I think Jane Witt does it a lot of service by having clever characters like Lizzie or Mr. Darcy too, who are like putting down real cerebral burns. But it's also just like I love Bingley's sisters. Like Bingley is a sweetheart, but his sisters are just absolute shitheads. And
they're very fun, aren't they?
Yeah, they're just as enjoyable to watch because they're just being absolute dicks to everyone. It's great.
Yeah, like they don't even bother trying to get to know anybody. They just come in like, I hate everyone in this room.
Their gossiping really does mirror Lizzie's gossiping a lot, right? Like, which I think is what's so fun about it is they really don't gel, but Lizzie is gossiping just as much as they are. I mean, I guess their gossip has a slightly meaner tone than Lizzie's does, but yeah.
I would say the contrast is that like when Lizzie and Darcy are gossiping, it's a bit like Caroline Bingley's quite vapid. And they try to kind of have that distinction. Like hers is all just like, oh, this person's like got a, second cousin who's a lawyer. Whereas like at least Lizzie and Darcy will actually comment on somebody's character. Like
that's what I was going to say.
Like he's slander, like he says that classic line where they're like, oh, do you think Lizzie's pretty or something? And he's like, I'd sooner call her mother a witch. And it's just like, yeah, her mum does fucking suck. Like, that's fair.
Yeah. No, I completely agree. The thing about Lizzie is she's generally hating people because they're dickheads, whereas the sisters are hating them because of, like, their position in society. So it's much easier to get on Lizzie's side, even if
but I think it's
there's a lot
of
similarities.
Like, everybody in this movie, except for Bingley and Jane, are just incredibly judgmental and almost determined to see the worst in other people, especially people who are just different from themselves. And that's kind of, I think, the big running theme and the big challenge that everybody has to try and overcome.
I'd love to see, like, the Bingley cut of Pride and Prejudice. Like, it wouldn't be as long, but just the whole series of events from the perspective of Bingley's, he just has zero fucking clue what's happening around him, Like, just...
I really like the bit where... So Darcy slights Lizzie and says that she's tolerable or whatever. And then she initially looks like, really cut. And then she's like, all right, revenge time. And so she just goes and starts just openly gossiping and giggling with Charlotte. And he's just like, shit. Like she just gets him with this just like petty revenge. And it's so good. It's such a power move. I love it.
Yeah, Darcy does overhear Lizzie gossiping about him multiple times in these first two episodes.
Well, she just does that thing where she's just like, like so high school, but it's so it fully cuts him. He's got you see it on his face.
Yeah, yeah, and I think that's part of the joy is knowing that this is a rom-com about these two characters.
Yeah,
seeing Mr. Darcy immediately kind of recognize, she doesn't give a shit if I'm Like, she's not going to suck up to me just because I'm who I am.
Well, and she'll give as good as she gets, like, as well.
Yes,
yeah.
yes.
Like, I kind of feel like it's almost like the original, like, she's not like other girls. Like, it is a bit that, isn't it? Like, you know, yeah, he's clearly got zero interest in Caroline Bingley, who just kisses his ass constantly. And he's like immediately infatuated with Lizzie when she isn't interested in him. And it's so weird.
Yeah, but also, again, it feels like a tale as old as time, right? Like,
yeah.
The
other classic line is just when, like, we all just laugh so hard when, you know, he's like, Bingley's going, you're like, you can't possibly have anything bad to say about Jane. Like, she's an angel. And he's just like, she smiles too much. Like, just so determined to see the worst. It's the only bad thing he could come up with, though, but just determined to see the worst in people.
Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, Jane and Mr. Bingley kind of become very quickly enamored with each other, and it's pretty obvious that they're a great couple.
Yeah.
So their courtship kind of continues, but unfortunately Jane falls ill while visiting, which forces Elizabeth to visit and stay with Jane and the Bingleys for a few days.
I mean, you say unfortunately falls ill. It is Mrs. Bennet's fault. I know it doesn't make sense for somebody to get a cold from being in the rain, but it's still Mrs. Bennet just like, you just want to slap her. You're like, oh, that is just so... Yeah. So basically what she does for anybody who doesn't know the story, she says that Jane has to go there on horseback because she can tell it's going to rain. And so then she'll be stuck there. Like, she just connives so that she'll have to stay there. But then because it's medieval times, as Elliot said.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's pre-antibiotics.
So people get sick from the rain. I don't know.
Well, no, they still do. It's just we get better now because we have antibiotics and
yeah, but you don't get sick from the rain. You get sick because you're inside, crowded more when it's raining.
No, it's because it's cold.
No, it's not.
Yes, it is.
I'm a doctor. Oh my God, that's not how you get sick. You have to get a virus.
No. The rain carries bad germs.
Viruses cannot exist outside of living cells.
The viruses are all around us all the time, trying to invade us, but I'm big and strong, except when I'm cold.
The clouds are full of viruses, and the rain is the vector by which the
Reuben, now you're just talking
from the viruses to your body.
Anyway,
but the point is, like, I'm pretty sure
Bennet has fucked up pretty bad.
Yeah, but like, this is the days back when I think the leading medical theory was still like the four humours and shit, right? So it's like, like getting
I'm
a
sure
little
she
bit
had
sick.
Some bloodletting done.
Yeah, like getting even a little bit sick is like a huge risk because basically doctors are going to do random shit and you just got to hope your body gets better on its own. Really,
like, funny when Mrs. Bennet says people don't die from trifling colds, and I was like, I thought people did back in those days all the time, but maybe I'm wrong.
The days when that would happen. Yeah, Mrs. Bennet really is shooting herself in the foot here, pretty consistently, and that's what really hurts. Is you've got what you want, Mrs. Bennet. Just fucking chill for 10 seconds.
Yeah, could we talk about this? Because it was I was getting so annoyed by Mrs. Bennet, and it was about halfway through this episode when I was like, "Oh, this is just mum. Like, like this is just our mum." And I thought it was so funny because it is like a caricature. Yeah. Of all the worst aspects of our mum. It's very funny.
Who did your mum make you visit on horseback, Elliot?
I mean, I did take horse riding lessons, but those were mostly voluntary. She's definitely...
What are the similarities? What are we talking about here?
I think, okay, well, the hilarious example is like our dad has this chronic cough and mum can't stand it. And so she's always like, stop coughing. And there's that scene where Mrs. Bennet is like, stop coughing, Kitty. And Kitty's like, I don't do it on purpose. And it's like, oh my God, it's like PTSD. It's like,
just the, like, I don't know. Our mom definitely has the same thing about just kind of getting overly involved and like stressing on our behalf. Like, I remember she took a holiday after I think you and Hannah finished high school.
Yeah.
Because your final exams were stressful for her.
She loves gossip and drama.
Yeah, true.
Yeah, really.
That's very silly.
So just like stuff like that. Like she's got that same temperament as Mrs. Bennet, and just sort of, I don't know.
Especially and actually, you know what as well? Like the way that she, like Mr. Darcy does like one thing that's rude, and she like fuck you forever. That is so our mum as well. Like somebody, I was a teenage girl, right? You have fights with people and then they're your friends like 2 minutes later. But mum's like, how can you be friends with that girl? She's such a bitch. And it's like, she's like a 14-year-old girl. I'm a bitch. We're all bitches. Like, funny.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, the rest of the Bennett family also visits. And God, Mrs. Bennett is really rough during that section. She's so openly hostile to basically everybody, especially Mr. Darcy. But it's so clearly like, let it be, Mrs. Bennett. You're making things so much worse by being here.
Like it's so hard to watch. You just want to hit her.
It's proper cringe.
I might be projecting my read on mum onto this, but it's that lack of trust in anyone else. She needs to be there doing it because she doesn't trust anyone else to do it right. And to be fair, she's kind of got a point because Mr. Bennett and Lizzie aren't really doing shit. So like, yeah.
As in like trying to connive and like she's trying to connive and you hate her for it because you're like, oh my God, like just leave them alone. And ironically, probably things would turn out perfectly well between Jane and Bingley if you did just leave them alone. But she feels this need, but it comes from a good place. Like she's trying to connive because she wants the family to be secure.
That's what I always tell myself about mum as well.
Yeah, exactly. It's like it always comes from a good place, but sometimes you're like, this is just not.
Just back off.
Or it's like, this is just not your place to like butt into this situation. Yeah. And that's like Mrs. Bennett. It's like, you just need to not butt in.
Yeah. But I will try to not turn this into the bitching about our mum segment for the next half hour. But I just want it noted that I could. Anyway, where were we in the notes?
I do really like, this is going back a little bit, but the scene where Darcy and Lizzie kind of have it's not like an argument, it's a little bit an argument / discussion when they're like in the drawing room where she starts out, she's taking a turn about the rom with Miss Bingley.
Oh yeah, that's so funny.
And then, it's just at the contrast between the two of them where, she's like, oh, that's such an outrageous comment. What should we do? And Lizzie's like, yeah, just like tease him and ignore him. And she's like, oh my God, we can't. He's too amazing. And then just descends into this like, this sort of semi-argument between Lizzie and Mr. Darcy, and just the whole rest of the room is just locked out because nobody knows what the fuck they're talking about because they're like, you can see Caroline Bingley is just really confused. She's like, she doesn't know what they're talking about. I don't think she can tell whether they're fighting or flirting. Like,
to be fair, I don't think they're quite sure.
I'm not sure whether anybody's sure.
Yeah.
And like, and they're just so similar, and it's just so funny because it's like they're just butting heads because they're the same fucking person.
I do kind of love like Caroline is she's so obsessed with Mr. Darcy, but just also somehow has zero clue. Like she spends all this time with him and just hasn't cottoned on to the fact that he's absolutely not in like because and especially as well, I'm pretty sure her crush is entirely because he's fucking rich.
Yes,
but she's never taken that step back and assumed that he might not be thinking that way. Like I don't know, she needs to read the room better.
Yeah, she just thinks he wants to kiss us, like I guess maybe most other men do, but actually he clearly wants the exact opposite of that.
There's that scene where Carolyn takes her walk around the room, I think around this time, where they're all kind of hanging out in the drawing room and Carolyn just kind of starts walking around the room. And I think then Lizzie joins her as well. And it's just this weird thing where you can kind of tell she just kind of wanted to try and make an opportunity to chat up Mr. Darcy, but didn't really have an avenue to do so.
Yeah,
I like when she starts walking, sad. She's like pretending to read a book, but she's just like flicking through the pages and then she just closes it and puts it down. Kind of leans over Darcy. He doesn't pay her any attention. She's like, it's not working.
Something else I wanted to call out from this bit as well, because like part of me is just like, what do these people do all day?
Nothing.
Like, I don't know. Their lives look so boring. Wait, there's
practice dancing. The dances seem so choreographed. I think you need to spend a solid amount of time every day practicing your dancing.
There's just like that one scene where like Lizzie walks in on Darcy just playing billiards by himself in this room, and at first I was like, what a loser. Yeah. And then I thought about it and I was like, shit, the fuck else does he have to do?
Yeah, what are you going to do? There's no video games in this time period, Elliot.
Then I was
maybe they had Snake, but nothing else.
Because there are people who don't constantly watch TV and play video games even today. And I don't quite understand how they get through the day. And like, then I was thinking, do you think
gossiping about, Mr. Collins?
This is my thing. Is I was thinking, do you think like if Mr. Darcy was watching a documentary on my life, he'd be like, this dude just sits in front of that screen all day. Like, that's so sad. Like,
I mean, it's a good point though. In that, not that last bit. That last bit was not a good point. It was stupid.
I have to admit, I drank a fair bit while we watched these 2 episodes last night, so I just had a bit of an existential crisis when I realised that Mr. Darcy would think my life is as boring as I think his life is.
The part that I thought was a good point is like they get so caught up in the dramas of the social life and society because they have nothing else to get excited about.
Yeah, true.
I mean, they show a little bit like they mention. So the women are expected to have all of these talents, like they, and it comes up more in like probably more in some of the other Jane Austen books, but like they're all expected to kind of be able to draw and play the piano and sing, and
that got mentioned,
and they do like crochet, like they are expected to be able to do lots of things very well, and so they don't put it in screen time, but like they do spend time doing like arts and crafts and music and things. And I think the men, like they show, they go hunting quite a lot, I think, actually, and like horse riding, and they play a lot of cards. But yeah, I mean, it's a very leisurely existence, I think.
The cards is the only part of that appeals to me.
And the other thing the men do, I think, a lot is like finances and stuff. Like they will do a lot of like
because they have to they have to do Microsoft Excel on paper.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Well, and like when you're running a household, I think like that's why the big estates like Darcy's have a steward, obviously helps them run everything, but they've got a whole bunch of staff and have to look after all of them. So it's like they have some stuff to do, but that's all I can think of. I still don't think they probably did a whole lot or were super stressed.
What do you think Mr. Darcy's favourite video game would be? Or maybe we should save that for the final episode once we know him.
You don't know him well enough yet.
Well, why don't we answer it?
I'll see
each episode and see how it changes. Yeah.
Okay. Because now you've got to say it's The Sims and that he probably like kills people.
He's got like Call of Duty vibes.
Yes, I was going to say the exact same thing. He's got this vibe where he'd like think that he's like putting a lot of effort in and he's probably thinking, I could go pro in this if I really wanted to. Exactly.
Or PUBG maybe. Yeah.
Yes. Okay. So we were so on the same page. I was about to say Call of Duty, Elliot.
That's freaky.
Or Solitaire.
No, that's Mary.
Yeah. So yeah, where are we up to? Yeah, so Mother Bennet comes by. Oh yeah, and then Elizabeth is kind of staying with the Bingleys and struggling to get along with them, except for Mr. Bingley, who's the best. But eventually Jane gets better.
You can't not get on with Mr. Bingley because like
he's just so charming,
he does smile
isn't he?
Much, so.
I would marry Mr. Bingley.
Yeah, in a heartbeat, and not just for his land. Neither.
No, even if he was poor.
Yeah,
but yeah, well, that's kind of how it wraps up. Is they head back home and Jane is all good.
Yeah, I feel like, I don't know, this was my take, is that it's kind of ironic because both like Jane and Bingley are obviously really keen on each other, but each of their families kind of hates the other one's family and would consider the other one to have like unfortunate relations, but just for totally different reasons. Like the Bingley sisters are like, oh, her uncle's an attorney, whereas, Mrs. Bennet is like, Darcy's a huge asshole. And it's just, I don't know, kind of funny. And then, similar to how I think Darcy and Lizzie, the things that they dislike about each other or the things they judge each other for, like they're really judgmental of each other, but that's kind of what makes them so similar, is that they're just kind of two people who feel like they maybe know better than everybody else a little bit.
Yeah, pretty much. It's just like really the only difference is that like the Bingleys and Darcy are actually higher up and more secure in that social ladder. But like everyone's just making assumptions about everyone else based on that social ladder. But she's also just like
really ready to just believe that he's like, he must be a huge snob.
Yeah.
But like there's a bit where she says, when Caroline Bingley comes up to her, this is in the next episode, but Caroline Bingley comes up to her and kind of says like, oh, look out for Mr. Wickham or something. And she then afterwards says to Jane, like, oh, she thinks she knows everything about Mr. Darcy or something. And it is like, no, you are the one who is the ignorant one. Like she just assumes she knows better than everybody else because she heard some rumors, and it's just because she just wants to hate him.
And I mean, in her defense, Carolyn Bingley is obviously a piece of shit, and I wouldn't trust her. But yeah.
True.
And since we're at the end of the first episode, can we talk about how iconically 90s the fucking freeze frame ending where the credits came up? I just had a chuckle at that. It was
it was
like I was watching BBC shit on the TV as an 8-year-old again. It was just great.
And then the theme music.
Yeah. Well, that's episode 1. I guess let's just get straight into episode 2, shall we?
Yeah.
The plot of episode 2 is Mr. Collins, who is the cousin of Mr. Bennet and inheritor of the Bennet estate after Mr. Bennet will die, comes by to visit the family.
And I know we already talked about it, but I just got to repeat, I fucking love this guy. He might be my favorite character because he's just, he's so unlikable, but he's trying.
Such a dork.
He's trying.
He's like the biggest dork that has ever existed.
And he's here to marry his cousins, which doesn't help. Yeah.
But he's also like, and this is, you have to remember, he's actually reached out the olive branch here.
Yeah.
And I always forget
it
so quickly because you hear that, you're like, oh, that's nice. And then he turns up and you're like, I hate him.
Go away. It's like on the macro level, everything about him is good. And like, but then it's just like on a micro level, like every micro interaction, you're like, I fucking hate this guy.
Yeah. He's just such a loser.
Can we talk about the fact that Mary very obviously has the hots for him, right? Like, very, very clearly. And it's kind of the perfect solution to the problem here. Like, Mrs. Bennet has done the biggest fumble ever. Because he comes in, and there's a scene later where he's like, tell me about your daughters. How are they all doing? Mrs. Bennet is like, well, Jane is, off the table, soz. Oh, but Lizzie. And instead, Mrs. Bennet should have just said, and Lizzie, don't worry about her, but here's Mary.
Do not even try for Lizzie.
Yes,
Mary would have gone a lot better. I don't know if I got the vibes that Mary was keen on him necessarily, but
100%.
No, Reuben's right.
If you rewatch the scene where he shows up, Mary is like kind of almost fanning herself at him from the get-go, from the very first moment.
She's no accounting for taste, I guess.
But it's really weird because, I mean, that's an addition they put into this series. Like, I don't remember it being in the book at all.
Oh, interesting.
I think it's just like a funny little thing that they just thought would be funny to add into this. But yeah, it makes it look like Mrs. Bennet's even stupider. Like the fact that she didn't say, don't bother with Lizzie is like crazy. There's no fucking way on this planet that Lizzie was ever going to say
But the mum
yes
didn't
to
think
Mr.
about
Collins.
Lizzie as a person. She thought about Lizzie as a product.
It's true. Yeah, that's exactly right.
But the thing is, Mr. Collins doesn't make any moves on Lizzie until Mrs. Bennet explicitly says, Lizzie,
take that one.
Go for Lizzie, basically.
She says, all of my other daughters have no engagements, and then he looks through, and it does that shot where it slides through all of them.
Oh, that's true.
And
that's
it's like,
But clearly Lizzie is the eldest. I don't know. I mean, like...
But she's also, I think, just a bit prettier than all the other ones and not so awkward or childish. Like, the other two are literally children. Then Mary's heaps awkward, and then he's like, I obviously want Lizzie.
Yeah.
I love also how he's introduced through this fucking letter that he wrote to Mr. Bennet, and it's so long and boring and unnecessary. Like, he's talking about which train he's going to get and shit.
It's so funny. It's like, and then I'm going to hire a carriage to go from here to here, and then I will get off at this station, and it's like it keeps going.
It's
so funny.
It's such a strong introduction because that, like, the minute he shows up after that letter, you're like, okay, this guy's boring as fuck, and that's kind of what he turns out to be.
And
but
then
it also
somebody says, "Oh, do you think he'll be really good or something? Like, do you think he'll be or do you think he'll be an idiot or something?" And Mr. Bennet's like, "I really hope so." Like, he's just hoping he's a complete idiot.
Yeah, but it was so funny as well because, like, the details, something about the way that letter was written, it reminded me of books like Frankenstein and Dracula, like other books from around this time. I mean, Dracula's a bit after, but like they were all from the perspective of like letters written to people, like. And
this is just before, so that was all in the Romanticism movement, and this is like right at the start of that. So it's like just before those.
Yeah, but I just remember, like, as good as Frankenstein and Dracula the books are, there's definitely segments where it feels like I'm like, because they're in the letter format, the authors have put in these bits where it's just like, and this is my journal for today, and it's always a bit like this is the boring part.
Yeah, like this is boring. Yeah,
and yeah, like Mr. Collins just came in with like the worst version of that energy. It was great.
Yeah.
I think that
I loved Mr. Collins.
I think
he's so fun.
That whole scene as well, where then they have the dinner with him, and they just, I don't know, just through dialogue, just a little bit of dialogue, just establish exactly like the kind of loser that he is. Like he's just he's such a people pleaser, but he thinks
he's bad at it.
He thinks he's a real, like he thinks he knows people so well. Like he thinks he's really good with people, and he keeps saying that. He's like, oh, you know, as a clergyman, I can relate to all sorts of people. I'm so great with people, and he's just the complete opposite. And it's just like he's so funny.
he has like negative self-awareness.
Yeah, and zero charisma.
Yeah. I mean, it's just classic to see the way Mr. Bennett says, like, you know, oh, all your little compliments, you know, are they made up on the spot, or are they the result of previous study? And just fully seriously, Mr. Collins is like, well, mostly it arises from the moment, but I do like to write down some little compliments in my own time just to sort of sprinkle in there, but with an unstudied air and all this. And it's just like, oh my God, you're so cringe. Why would you admit that?
Yeah.
And you can just imagine him sitting there at his desk writing down like little pre-made compliments for people. Like that's exactly him.
It's so relatable.
Yeah.
Pre-plans all his conversations. What a hero.
I mean, what else are we doing in the shower, right?
And he talks about how he's got such a gift for flattery.
Yeah.
He's the best. Lizzie bonds with a new military man in town, Mr. Wickham, at a party. But unfortunately, Mr. Collins has set his eye on Lizzie a bit.
I gotta say, I was so excited when we met Mr. Wickham on this street in the medieval town.
Yeah.
Because him and Darcy...
I'm calling it that.
They give such evil eyes to each
and
other.
then Darcy leaves, and I was just like... at this point in my live notes, I just wrote, Wickham and Darcy drama, I'm so excited. Like, because this is exactly the shit I wanted from Pride and Prejudice. I wanted to get embroiled in petty drama. And it was just so exciting to meet Wickham, and you're like, oh, we're going to knock shit up. This is great.
I'm so excited. But Wickham is very charming, isn't he? Like
he's hotter than Darcy.
Oh, and he's just like, I mean, he's just really good with people. Like he's the opposite of Darcy and Collins. Like he's just like really good at engaging with people. Like he's a conversationalist.
And he's hotter. I feel like you're skipping over that.
I mean, I think Colin Firth is hotter than whoever that guy is.
Crazy.
But their sideburns are in direct competition with each other.
The sideburn game, like I know we talked about the outfits and stuff already, but we should pay particular note. The sideburn game in this series is phenomenal.
Yeah. Yeah. But yeah, he's got a high charisma role for sure. Like you can tell he's got everybody wrapped around his finger. Like he's just so likable from the get-go, which is just the complete opposite of pretty much every male except Bingley that we've met so far in this whole show.
And Mr. Bennett.
Mr. Bennett's not a super likable guy.
Yeah, he is. If you're smart enough to realize he's taking the piss out of everything, he seems to like.
I don't know. He's kind of failed in his role as
bitter.
The patriarch.
Yeah, like what does he do? You know, more than anyone else in the story, I'm kind of like, what do you?
Oh, he just reads.
Yeah, mate, what do you do? And I mean, I guess, you know, what's he going to hang out with his wife? Like, I guess I do nothing as well.
Yeah.
But, yeah.
Hello, Lexi.
So this party, we then head to another party, and this is where the Bennets really start to fuck things up. Effectively, the entire family, other than Jane and Lizzie, just continue to make a series of social faux pas of escalating cringiness.
Before we get into that, though, again, can we? The food in this looked so good. Like, whoever did the food part of the set in this show nailed it. I don't like ham, but fuck, I felt like ham while I was watching them carve into a big ham, like leg of ham.
Well, I totally missed that.
Oh, it was so good. Anyway, sorry. Yeah, back to.
It's like when you watch Harry Potter and they're like eating the Great Hall, and you're like, Geez, I'm hungry.
Yeah. Those Harry Potter feasts are maybe the best part of the Harry Potter series.
Yeah, that's some top tier food porn for sure.
Yeah.
But yeah, I find this scene every time, it's so hard to watch. Like, you actually groan, you're like,
oh, it's rough.
My God. Like, it just keeps going. So there's like,
When Mary
gets on the
started
piano,
singing.
and you think that's bad. But then Mr. Bennet gets up and kicks her off. And then it just keeps going. Like, what happens next?
Yeah.
Then, like Lydia comes in, flirting with the soldiers. Then Mrs. Bennet's gossiping loudly, and it just keeps going. And you're like, oh God.
I loved it.
Yeah. It's really hard.
Mr. Collins introduces himself to Mr. Darcy, which was a huge social faux pas. You weren't allowed to go up to somebody who you hadn't been formally introduced to. Yeah.
I do like that Mr. Darcy just walks away from him mid-sentence.
He just gets his name. He's like, what's your name? And then he's like, bye.
Yeah. Can we talk about this dance scene? So Mr. Darcy invites Lizzie to dance, and she can't think of an excuse not to, so ends up dancing with him. And it's the world's most tense dance, where they're just kind of trading barbs back and forth. Like, what? I mean, I guess the answer is Mr. Darcy is, I don't know, like, intrigued by her and trying to spend more time with her, but it's just got such strange energy.
It's that line between fighting and flirting again, where, like, he was 100% into it.
It's such a good scene. Like, it's like you're so into it, but they're just like dancing.
And it's that shitty sort of dancing that you did in middle school that everyone hated and I've never done since.
Yeah. But also the way that they've done it is like, I like how there's a lot of the scenes where they're sort of walking and then they sort of turn away from each other to wrap back around the other people.
Yeah.
And they've just like, I don't know how they did it, but they've timed the dialogue perfectly where like one of them would say something interesting and then they would both sort of split up from each other and you'd see the look on Lizzie's face because you're on her side with the camera.
Yeah.
As she thinks about what he just said or something or whatever she just said. And then they sort of walk back around and then they start talking again. Like, it's really well done and well timed.
I mean, the tense conversation during a dance, I think, is a very, like, that happens in a lot of other things I can think of off the top of my head. Like, it is because it's good. Like, as you said, I think what it is that the dance sometimes can be used to dictate a pause in the conversation, which let's just sit on lines and react.
Yeah.
And also because it's an excuse for it not to turn into a full-on yelling match because you need to maintain decorum while the dance is going. So, like, it has to be kept at a low volume and, like, can't be too intense.
Yeah, it's such a good scene.
Yeah, quite fun. Mr. Darcy very much knows how to dance. He pulls it off pretty flawlessly, doesn't he?
Yeah, for somebody who, like, hates dancing and never does it, he's
yes.
very good. And, I love, again, the contrast with Mr. Collins, just, like, keeps treading. I think
my God, yeah.
Kitty makes a comment later, she's like, Mr. Collins trod on my dress and tore it or something. And you're like, of course he did.
Yeah, right from the get-go, Lizzie has to be like, no, to your left, Mr. Collins.
He's gone the wrong way, yeah.
Very funny. But so, yeah, Mr. Collins ends up making an offer to Lizzie, but she enthusiastically refuses. Mr. Collins, after being refused about 4 times in one conversation, eventually gets the message and leaves the family. Weirdly going to stay with Charlotte, right? Which I thought was kind of strange, but whatever.
No, it's like very, I mean, because obviously Charlotte's just happened to come over and visit, right?
Yes.
And then you can see, she's like, oh, well, I wonder
if
I should invite him over. And then she has this little look on her face and like, because we all know Charlotte. Charlotte has her finger on the pulse. She knows exactly what is up and she's got a plan. Like,
yeah,
she has a plan, guys.
Well, I think it's pretty clear that she's going to make an attempt to, I mean, Mr. Collins has pretty good prospects, right?
Yeah. As he says to Lizzie, he's like, he's like, I'm a catch. She's like, no, thanks.
Yeah, he's a catch in every single way except for who he is.
Yeah, except for his personality.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can't wait to see what he's up to next month.
Yeah. That's where I guess our episodes end, huh? Any other final thoughts about this one?
I just want to give my take on Mary because I think I remember maybe this is my high school English coming back, and I'm sorry if it's really annoying, but like, there's other Jane Austen works where she kind of like, there's one called Sense and Sensibility, which is all about two sisters where one is just like kind of cold-hearted and logical, and the other one is like overly emotional and over the top, and kind of looks at the whole thing though about how the really emotional one just assumes that the other sister has no feelings and kind of tramples over them all the time and stuff like that. Like, and I think there's a lot of themes in her book about how you need to find a healthy middle ground between different parts of yourself. Like you want to be smart and you want to be logical, but you also want to follow your heart. And that's why, you know, she paints Lizzie as such a good character, is because she kind of embodies that. Like she, you know, she's somebody who's smart and tries hard, but like in contrast to Mary, who just has zero interest in other people and ignores the world around her and is just totally absorbed in like books and music and all those things. And that we're kind of made to find her ridiculous. And I don't know, I really like that. Like, it's just she really promotes like being a balanced person who, you know, it does actually think about other people and is engaged with the world around you and the people around you. But also not to the point where you just become vapid and silly.
Yeah.
And she does that so well by having such different characters and pointing out, like, I don't know, the contrast between like Mary and Lydia and Lizzie, I think is a really good example of that. And that's why I don't like Mary, is because I think she's just actually like quite a self-centered person who just refuses to engage with anyone and anything. Yeah. That's my take on Mary. And she kind of thinks she thinks she's smarter than everybody, but she
does think that she's better than everyone else.
And this is the other thing. She thinks
it's a classic nerd character. Like,
yes.
Well, it's interesting because it's from so long ago, but like that's such a relatable concept, right? Like she thinks because she reads a lot of books and stuff that she knows better than everybody, but actually like she's probably not as smart as Lizzie. But Lizzie lives in the real world as well.
Well, I was going to say she might have more book knowledge or whatever, but she's not street smart like Lizzie. Like, you know, Lizzie's...
Yeah, Lizzie can engage with the world around her in a way that, like, Mary can't. Well, and it's made pretty obvious that Lizzie is probably smarter than her, but anyway.
Yeah.
And I just, that's, like, weirdly relatable in the modern times.
Yeah, it is.
Like,
it holds up pretty well.
Like, Elliot said, describe Mary, he's like, she would have Tumblr. I was like,
that's
totally.
right. I was choosing social networks for each sister at one point last night.
Yeah.
And I feel like Mary would have Tumblr.
Totally.
Or, maybe Reddit, actually.
Yeah, I think Mary would be a Redditor.
Yeah, she's got like a neckbeard vibe.
Yeah, 100%.
Lydia's on TikTok.
Down to thinking that Lydia's on TikTok. Yeah, which social media is each person on?
Well,
Jane is Instagram. No, Jane's Facebook. Jane just has Facebook.
Yeah. I think Lizzie shuns social media and she doesn't partake.
I reckon Lizzie just still has MySpace. Like, anyway.
She's on Bebo.
Yeah, just because nobody else is.
Yeah.
Interesting.
She's like, I have email. Text me.
Yeah. Oh, no. Yeah, I like that.
Oh, yeah.
Lizzie has email. That's good. Yeah.
Well, yeah, I'm excited to continue to see the evolving, blossoming romance between Lizzie and Darcy, which we haven't really felt at all from Lizzie's side, but
no.
I guess we'll see the other side of the Wickham story, and that will possibly be the bridge into it.
Wickham's going to burn her somehow, and yeah.
Can't wait. But we'll have to wait for next month's episode, where we're covering episodes 3 and 4.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, I wrote a little outro for this.
Okay,
it is a truth
Elliot.
universally acknowledged that a listener in possession of a good fortune must be in want of patreon.com/doofmedia. So
that's very true.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
it is universally acknowledged.
So be either be a patron or you already are a patron, in which case, thank you. You are the... I've already lost track of the metaphor. Thanks for being a patron.
And as we say every time,
bye listeners.
And
get out of our swamp.
And
also, no harm ever came from reading a book. End of outro. No, that's not part of the outro.
I don't
Reuben,
know.
you keep adding that in there, and I'm not.
I do.
I'm editing it out of the episode.
You can edit it as many times as you want. I'm going to keep it in the outro.
No, as in I edit the audio.
It
It's not making it into the
any
audio.
stupider than No
That's
Harm That
all right.
Became
We'll
from
No,
Reading
but
a
the
Book.
system, Georgia, the system is that we add one for full series that we do.
Oh,
Not the
yeah.
interludes.
And
There's no Scooby-Doo part to the intro and outro. There's
true.
no whatever other interludes we did that I forgot.
So this is just going to really suddenly cut off after we all say book, and then there's
No,
gonna
I'm just gonna bleep it.
Cut.
I'm gonna bleep it out. So people are gonna this is all gonna be in the episode, but what you guys said is gonna be bleeped out. So nobody's gonna know the words.
Because I said a few of the words then again later, so
Yeah.
you're just going to have to.
Yeah,
bleep
that's
those
fine.
too.
I'll spend hours bleeping it
You
out. No,
And
end of episode.